I want to spend about maybe 10 seconds on this one. Happy anniversary, Elliotte. 1 year anniversary of the podcast. Now let's move along.
Where's my gift?
What's that?
Where's my gift?
I got the same thing that I got for you last year, only in blue.
I believe the first year anniversary is paper.
I will hand you this read then.
Thank you very
when
much.
We throw to the beginning of the podcast. When we kick it off officially, this will be your read to do. Take it right up until the GMC terrain. Hold on to that for a second, Elliotte. Okay. Do you know or have you seen @NN Stats, Namita?
I know who she is, and I did see it last week.
For those of you that don't know, this is glorious. This is an homage to Elliotte trolling the NHL world on an almost nightly basis. Now, first of all, for those that may not be initiated into what Elliotte does to preview games, normally there are acronyms for teams like the Anaheim Ducks, ANA, Toronto, TOR, Calgary, CGY, but you're having none of that. In a lot of ways, you're not unlike Jacques Derrida and Michel Foucault, these post-structuralists who say objects are whatever we define them as. Because there is no transcendental signifier, there can be no transcendental signified, which is a really pretentious way of saying you kind of do whatever you want with acronyms.
First of all, I'm not as smart as those guys, especially not Derrida, a person I'm somewhat familiar with. That guy would be insulted if he was
Jacques
alive.
Lacan, Simone de Beauvoir, we'll throw them all around.
If Derrida was alive, he would be insulted that you were comparing him to me.
Fair.
That's number one. You know what? I didn't even realize that I was doing. It started off with Montreal, MON instead of MTL, and Calgary, CAL instead of CGY. And I think my Columbus one was off too. And people would always complain. They'd get mad. You know, when are you going to do this right? You know, it's not CAL. It's not California. It's CGY. So I was thinking, if people are going to get upset by that, I'm going to take it to the extreme. And now there are people who said to me, you've got to really stop doing this. You're going too far, including a couple of people in the league. And
the league have said this?
Yes. So I planned on January 1st as a New Year's resolution to stop it.
Yeah.
But people really seemed to like some of the different ones I was coming up. Give the people what they want.
Yeah.
So I will probably finish the season and find some new shtick next year.
So it's going to be a fresh coat of paint next season, but this year,
if I can think of anything,
you're committed to the bit. Like you're doing it to the end of the playoffs.
Well, this is it. So,
like if you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound.
Yes,
so I applaud you for that.
I wanted to do it, so it was. I always had to have the first letter and the last letter, but now I'm beginning to think there's no rules to this. I've started combining them into one word, and I'm looking for things that make and fit. Like, for example, somebody said that when Tampa Bay comes to Toronto, you have to do tomato. And there's a guy, Kurt, he's in Philadelphia.
That's awesome.
He used NN Stats random generator, and when Pittsburgh plays Philadelphia, you can come up with Peppa Pig. And if you're a parent, you know what Peppa Pig is. It's a cartoon.
Pig,
So I don't even think we're broadcasting Pittsburgh-Philadelphia, the outdoor game, but I think I just have to do it.
So tonight, we're doing Nashville, Chicago nationally. The regional on Sportsnet is Colorado and Calgary. And just typing in Colorado in the Elliotte Friedman acronym generator, CLO comes out for Colorado. Have you used CLO before for Colorado?
No, I have not.
So that's a new one for you there.
Yeah, but now that it's been there, I almost feel like I have to challenge myself to do something else.
Have you thought of what you're going to use for Nashville and
No,
Chicago?
I'll do it. I'll do it
will,
tonight just after our meeting.
Okay, because this podcast won't come out until after we've actually done the game. So you'll just do it right before the game begins.
Yes, after the meeting, I'll sit down.
Comes to you like a Blakean vision of romantic poetry. You're just inspired.
You look at it.
The muse is upon you. How can I offend the most amount of people with an acronym?
And the other thing is, I started to figure out, is there other ways I could do it? Should I start using the team names? Should I do it as a jumble? Remember the old newspapers? They had the jumbles. My dad loved those.
Yeah, that's good.
I don't know. There's lots to play with. It's a blank canvas.
Blank canvas, tabula rasa, I believe is how they refer to it. So good for you, committed to it. Right off the bat, before we get into the podcast, we have a lot of really good Ask 31s.
By the way, Namita, like she's pretty smart. Like, I don't know her at all, but she's got a pretty bright future.
Mm-hmm.
people tell me she's, like I said, I don't know her at all. I'm a little bit familiar with her work, but people tell me she's very bright and has a good future.
You know you're good when you vanish.
Yes.
So she's the next person that might
she
just
works for the Eagles.
Vanish from hockey Twitter.
Yeah. She's there's her. I'm a big believer in the right people are always watching.
Yeah.
And I think they've been watching her.
Who's been watching the Edmonton Oilers? Everybody. A lot of our Ask 31s, and I can't get to all of them, but a lot of them revolve around the Edmonton Oilers and what to do with the team, what's happening with the general manager, how are you feeling if you're Connor McDavid. What's happening with Edmonton right now? As we record this podcast, they just got stomped 7-2 by the San Jose Sharks last night after walking into Anaheim and winning 4-0, after getting curb stomped the night before against the Los Angeles Kings. California's been an interesting trip again for Edmonton.
And they beat Arizona too, which was a game they have to have. This is their year, Jeff. Their 6 of their next 7 are at home. Yeah. And the only road game, I believe, is Vancouver. And of the 7 teams they're playing, the only ones that currently stand in a playoff position are Buffalo and Calgary. Mm-hmm. They have to make their move here. You know, you think they were 50 points out the way people are talking about them. They're 2 points out. But what's going on in Edmonton says to me that this is an organization saying, for lots of different reasons, missing the playoffs are not an option. Sometimes you see a team lurching the way they are. An organization will say, this is not our year, and we're not going to waste assets or worry about assets to try just to get in. That's not what's going on in Edmonton. And I think there's 2 reasons. Number one, they've got luxury suites and stuff that are up. Some of them are on a 3-year term. This is year 3. So I think there's that. That organization understood what a playoff run could do for them financially when they were there 2 years ago and they went 7 games with Anaheim in the second round. I think you get a bit seduced by that, but between that and the suites, I think there's that. And number 2, jobs are on the line. And anytime jobs are on the line, people do things that they wouldn't normally do. So between those 2 forces, there is an added level of importance to make the playoffs that some of the teams around them, Jeff, just don't have.
A few things conspiring against the Edmonton Oilers. One of them is the Pacific all of a sudden is getting real good.
At the top.
Right. So we're looking at, best case scenario, of course, wild card spot for the Oilers. But all of a sudden, Calgary's been hot. Vegas might be the hottest team in the NHL, maybe the best team playing right now.
San Jose.
And San Jose Sharks have been dismantling teams on the regular. We'll talk about Erik Karlsson a little bit later on the podcast. So that's all conspiring against Edmonton. And again, I mentioned off the top about what's conspiring about them. Compounding all of this, I would imagine, weighing heavy on the psyche of the Oilers and Oilers fans, Calgary's really good. Calgary's a really, really good team, and it's tough to watch your provincial rival thrive like this when you have the best player in the NHL and you can't get it in the right gear.
I would say that is a factor, but to me, the frustration buildup has been coming a long time for that. I mean, that's just probably for their fans an added kick in the teeth, but I don't know if that's as big a factor maybe internally or even on social media than some of the other things. You watch, like I said earlier, Jeff, you'd think they were 50 points out of the playoffs, and they're right there. Social media, I think, I always am careful about how much weight to put into it. What percentage of the public has a Twitter account? It's like 20. 20% of the people have a Twitter account. And I think Twitter has certain leanings, both politically and in terms of who uses it. But if you thought that everybody had a Twitter account, you would think that there would be riots in the streets of Edmonton right now. And there is. There's no question that there's a lack of consumer confidence in what the Oilers are doing.
Right.
And Ken Hitchcock got in there and he breathed a little bit of life into the team. He got them going. He still has them in the race, even though it sure looks like a mirage. I just see a fan base that has no belief in what the organization is going to do.
What's the saying? If you start listening to your fans, soon
You're
going to
end up right next to them.
Yeah, so I do understand that. You know what I felt bad for last night, even though we finally scored?
Lucic?
I just hope that he's not on social media. And if he is, I hope he wasn't reading it last night.
It's not. It's supposed to be like, okay, not to know what's going on out there.
Finally scores in North America, scored the goal in the preseason overseas. Finally scores a goal, and it is just, that's the excuse to get the stick out for the piñata. And it was, have a go at Milan Lucic. And if you can read lips, you know exactly what he said after he scored the goal and getting back to the bench, and all that you saw afterwards was him getting starched on Twitter. That's this team that's been false started outside of the stretch when Hitchcock first took over so many different times this year. When you have a team that gets false started like that, maybe you shouldn't be surprised at that reaction. It is the paper anniversary, so read the piece of paper up to GMC Terrain.
By the way, you mentioned I hope Lucic isn't on social media.
Yeah.
I hope his family isn't telling him what is said on social media, because that's the worst. I always tell relatives and friends, don't tell people what's said about them on TV or social media, because you always make it worse.
Welcome to 31 Thoughts, the podcast, hearing some clips about EK65 Erik Karlsson, who is ripping up the NHL 14-game point streak. What gives? This is night and day. This is not the player we saw earlier this season, Elliotte.
First of all, in honor of the many Spanish-speaking fans of the San Jose Sharks, we should say that Erik is on fuego.
Very nice. Yes. Very nice. Well done.
I don't even know if that is actually right, but it sounds good.
I said things like keeping it real. You're on fuego.
That's right. So he got suspended, and he was furious. He was really upset at his 2-game suspension for the hit on Austin Wagner. And since then, he's been back 6 games. And he's got a goal and 15 assists in 6 games. Yeah. And did you watch that game the other night? I did,
yes.
He is a zone entry machine. Every time he got the puck, and near the blue line, they got it in.
He's always been that, though.
But it looks even more. I don't know why. Like, for David Amber used to always rip me for how much I talked about Karlsson 2 years ago in that playoff run. He's like, could you be any more in love with Erik Karlsson? He would tell me how nauseating it was to hear me talk about Karlsson that year. But I'm watching him now, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
They're playing Vegas on Thursday night.
That's the game of the week. That's the game of the week.
And we've got them on Saturday night because Ottawa's going to be there. But I did talk to somebody there, and they said the one thing is that people always forget. He went through a lot. Whether you agree or disagree with him on the trade, it was a huge change. He's been in Ottawa his whole career. He goes out to San Jose. It's a change in life. It's a change in terms of the way the teams play. He probably has a lot less freedom to do things than he did in Ottawa, at least initially. They're probably a lot more, Erik, we have Brent Burns here. We have Vlasic here, who's actually having a really difficult season. We have guys like Logan Couture, Pavelski here. He probably had to fit in. He had to fit into a new team. There's probably less he was allowed to do. It takes a little bit of time. And that's what this guy said to me. He says, everybody has forgotten what a huge change this is for him. And it takes time. And
I remember talking.
I think that's been a factor.
Further to that point, I remember talking to someone, this is 3 years ago, about defensemen going east-west versus defensemen going west-east.
Yeah.
And he was making the point that if you look at defensemen the last 10 years in the NHL, when you go from the Eastern Conference to the Western Conference, you struggle initially because the game is that profoundly different.
Mm-hmm.
You go to the East, you have an extra little bit of time to make that play, to have that look around, to make your read, to figure out what you're trying to do. In the West, it's different, and that gap is shorter, and you need to make your decisions quicker. And a lot of guys, pretty much all the guys that he was rattling off too, is pretty remarkable. Said, like, look, it's these guys have a challenge. Like, it's hard when you're a defenseman going from the Eastern Conference to the Western Conference. Karlsson, to me, as much as he's the one-man zone entry machine, and he is, he's also the long bomb tape-to-tape man. Now, I know Victor Hedman may have the title right now, But, man, I don't know who makes a better tape-to-tape, long bomb, 60, 80, whatever.
Remember the one
pass
in the air a few years ago in the playoffs to Hoffman?
To Hoffman, yeah, that was fantastic. The pass itself and grabbing the puck right at the blue line and staying on side. It was a great play by Hoffman and a great play by Karlsson. I don't know who's better at it right now, Hedman or Karlsson, but it's a wonderful, barstool discussion to have when you're just sitting around. So what becomes now of Erik Karlsson and the San Jose Sharks? What is the future there, if any?
Well, I think there's always a better chance. Like, people believe that there was a deal in the pocket when that got done. Yeah. And the longer we went, I really began to disagree with that was the case. First of all, it came out that they couldn't sign him to an 8-year deal until after the trade deadline because he wasn't on San Jose's reserve list at the time of last year's trade deadline. Yeah. So immediately that kind of pushed everything back. Secondly, there was a bit of a struggle as things started. We talked about this earlier. There were teams watching him that felt he was not the same, particularly defensively.
Take him wide.
That he couldn't turn as well.
Yeah.
He couldn't defend against players going wide as well. I've been watching for that. He's had some, really smart defensive plays. He had a really good one against Kovalchuk the other night when they beat the Kings. He outweighed him and knocked the puck off his stick. There was one I thought early in the first period last night against Kara where Kara is in the behind the net with the puck and he just gets in there, outweights him and turns it around the other way. I think there's one very interesting stat that some kind of people look at with him and say, what does this mean? And that is when Karlsson is on the ice, his team's on-ice save percentage tends to be low. And that has always been the kind of circle, what does this mean? And I wondered what it was like in San Jose, and it still isn't great this year, but they haven't got great goaltending, and Vlasic's is even worse than he is. Mm-hmm. And, Vlasic, how I feel about him. I think he's one of the most underappreciated great players, although he's really having a strangely bad year. The thing is, Ottawa's always had weird goaltending. You'll have years where guys do great and years where guys will do terrible, and it's been very inconsistent. So I know that there's this kind of mark on him out there, but I don't know yet what it really means. Like, to me, it's like, is it his circumstance or is it him? Mm-hmm. I think he's a hell of a player. I think earlier in the year, Jeff, I don't think there was any way that any of us thought he was going to get $11 million. Now, and I realize there's still months to go, including the playoffs.
Yeah.
But look at this.
That was going to be my follow-up question. Will he ever see, in your estimation, a contract offer, the likes of which he saw when Pierre Dorion and the Ottawa Senators said, okay, we're moving on? What was that last offer?
What I've been told is there was an email from the team to either the player or the agent, maybe both. I don't know how it exactly went. But they said, we're going to offer you 8 years at $11 million a year, 8 times 11, 888. And Karlsson didn't respond. And they reached out again in July. And finally Karlsson wrote back and said, look, I'm just not willing to consider this at this time. Mm-hmm. They never got into structure. They never got into anything like that.
It was very base. Here are the years. Here's the money.
Yes.
No details.
And then they reached out, I think, about 3 weeks later, and they asked him again. He wrote back and he said, guys, I'm just not. And it wasn't rude from what I understand. It wasn't like a kick to the head. It was simply, I'm not willing to do this right now. And as we know, there were some wild rumors in the summer, and I believe that was Dallas. If you're going to ask me who I think the closest team was to trading for him before San Jose did,
we know that.
I believe it was Dallas.
We know that.
Okay?
That day that they did say again, they thought they were going to have 2 press releases.
Right.
We know that.
And then of course he got there on the day and they just said, okay, it's time to do this now. Yeah. There are teams looking at this right now. And how can you not think that someone out there is going to offer him 10 or 11 million if this keeps going like this?
If he plays the way we saw at the beginning of the season, because I was with you, I was saying I think that price tag may have sailed. I'm not saying that anymore.
No.
But again, we still have half the season to go. We still have playoffs to go.
And San Jose's got the
like.
inside track. Like the thing that works really well for San Jose now is he knows it can work for him now. I think at the beginning, like I said, you've got a hierarchy there. You know, Thornton has been hurt, but he's still very much the big dog there. You've got Couture. You've got Pavelski, who's an unrestricted free agent. You've just given 7 years to Evander Kane. You've got some young players like Meyer and Hertl who are beginning to play. Plus, also, you've got Brent Burns on the blue line. Yeah. You've got Vlasic on the blue line. And those guys are signed for a long time. You know, it's the thing about the San Jose room is it's a strong room. They've got a lot of guys who kind of run it, although I think Thornton has always been the big dog. Yeah. But there's a lot of guys who are established there, and it's their way. And I think he had to find his way there. And now he knows it can work.
To that point, you know where we really saw that most recently? Was at the draft in Dallas, when the San Jose Sharks took Ryan Merkley in the first round. And it might have been about the only team confident enough in their leadership group to, I don't want to say waste, but to spend a first-round pick on Ryan Merkley.
And Doug Wilson's a confident guy, too. Yeah. And Peter DeBoer is a confident guy, too.
Sure.
Like, those guys are confident in what they do and what they've got.
You've made this point a couple of different times on the podcast. Doug Wilson gets guys to stay.
Yeah.
People stay in San Jose. I know there's a couple that, okay, just here for a rental and then I'm gone. But generally, guys stay. Like, they don't, like, when they get there and Wilson gets his hooks into them, they stick around.
Well, it's a good place to play without being ridiculous. In the sense that they've got really passionate fans. The building draws. They've got a good owner. He's very quiet, Platner, but he puts his money where his mouth is into the organization. And it's a great place to live. It's expensive, but it's a great place to live. The other thing there too is that I once said to Doug Wilson, "You're a great salesman," and he got annoyed at that. He didn't like that. He says, "I don't think I should be called a salesman for believing in what we have here and telling people about that." But there's no question that guys go there and they like what's coming. Now, all of that said, Jeff, the interesting thing about the Sharks is, depending on what happens this year, we could see some big changes. You know, Joe Thornton, from what I understand, they were interested in having him at the All-Star game, but the injuries prevented it. Yeah. I hope he shows up. I hope he gets a big ovation. I hope they honor him in some way. But this could be it. Yep. That would be a big change. Joe Pavelski, their captain, is not signed yet for next year, and he's having a 20-goal season. You know, depending on what they decide to do, there could be some big changes there.
The flip side of the Erik Karlsson conversation about, you know, can they keep him is, does he want to stay?
Yeah, of course.
Erik?
As always, that's a huge question. It's his call. You know, it's his wife's from Ottawa. It's a big change. But I can tell you this, he's probably thinking a lot better of it right now than he was in November.
Playing great. Speaking of playing great, what's happened to the Pittsburgh Penguins all of a sudden? I know we've always talked about don't count out Sidney Crosby.
They're having a bad stretch. It was ridiculous. You know, what did we talk about?
But there's bad stretches, and then there's bottom of the Eastern Conference. Now, they pulled themselves out of it, and
they still have some weird games here and there. Like it looks like there's a lot of. We're bored.
You know what it is about Pittsburgh?
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever seen a team that is as highly skilled that has to work as hard as they do for wins. Like when they take their foot off the pedal, like, you know, some teams we've seen in the past can just surf on skill and they can pick up their points, maybe they'll lose one or two along the way. But it seems as if when Pittsburgh takes the foot off the pedal, they fall apart. But when the foot's on the pedal, good luck.
Well, I think that a lot of that is Crosby's mentality. He's, what's the thing they always said about him? He's a superstar player with a fourth line mentality.
Yeah, first line grinder, I think is what Ryan Whitney calls him. I'm paraphrasing Whit, but
right. And then with Whitney, there's probably 4 swear words in the middle. But I think that probably goes throughout their lineup, because if you're top players like that, a lot of other people are like that. But it hasn't been easy for them this year. The goaltending, Murray has not been himself.
Much better now.
He's getting back, but for a long time he wasn't there. So that's a huge factor. If you don't have goaltending, you're chasing everything. But their philosophy is, as long as Malkin and Crosby are in their primes, we're going for it every year, which I would do too. I think it's a smart philosophy. But eventually that catches up with you. And we're starting to see that a bit now. Rutherford's been out there. He's been looking around at what's out there. I think he likes Ferland. It wouldn't surprise me if he liked Dougie Hamilton. Kessel, he was out there and then they pulled him back. You know how Jim Rutherford thinks. It's harder for them to make deals now. Like I was thinking about it. Somebody suggested to me they might be in on both Ferland and Hamilton. And Carolina wants scorers. Okay, what scorers does Pittsburgh had to give up? I think it's going to be harder for them to make trades now.
It will be difficult. The one potential scorer that they let go for Marcus Pettersson, who, by the way, has been
really good. Really good.
And
I tend to believe that the Ducks, anybody who comes from the Ducks has a chance, because they're really good at finding players.
Specifically defensemen.
Yeah.
That team finds defensemen. Yeah. Pettersson's fit really nicely on a pair with Jack Johnson for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And listen, it's a real interesting team right now. And to your point, I don't think that Jim Rutherford's done. Like, listen, some of the things, even, you look at, Derek Brassard and Phil Kessel moving down to the quote-unquote third line, not unlike what we saw at the HBK line a couple of playoff years ago. All of a sudden, Kessel and Brassard have found something together on that third line. Like, I'm with you. I think that Jim Rutherford still has, deals in his hip pocket that he's hoping to consummate before a trade deadline. I just don't know what Pittsburgh at this point has to give up to get what they need. I'm sure they would love Dougie Hamilton. I'm sure they'd love, Michael Ferland, who brings some toughness and can score as well, and maybe someone that can help to deal with a Tom Wilson problem. And there are only a handful of those guys around. Michael Ferland could be one of them. I just don't know what Pittsburgh has to give up at this point.
That's the issue. Like, what are you trading? Especially for a team like Carolina that really wants scoring badly, what scoring do you have to give up?
Mentioned Anaheim a second ago with the Sprong trade, and Pettersson comes in. You like players that come from there, but what's happening with Anaheim right now? You write about it in 31 Thoughts, and we know the GM does not like to make in-season changes behind the bench, but ...
Well, they're 0-6-2, right? But they're like, the thing about that Western Conference, is who chasing that wild card really scares you. Now, all of a sudden, Dallas has caught Colorado, and I think one of those two teams is going to get in. But then you're looking at
Colorado's dropping hard.
Yeah, they're not very deep. It'll be interesting to see, because they've got a lot of assets. They need depth. They've got a lot of assets. What do they do there with all those assets? They say this is not our year and we'll just go the way we go, or do we give ourselves help? I could see them saying we're going to wait another year.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I can see them being patient and wait another year. But look at those other teams chasing the wild card. Who scares you? Minnesota?
No.
Anaheim?
Nobody does.
Vancouver?
None of the wild card
Edmonton,
teams scare you. No. None of them.
Arizona and Chicago are right out there. I mean,
Chicago's got to go on a huge
and
rip.
Arizona, I mean, their injuries, like they are battling to hang on, just battling to hang on. I really like that Hill goalie though. But they are battling to hang on. Like, nobody scares you there. So if you're Anaheim, it's 0-6-2 and you don't like it, but you're still in the race. Here's the thing: you always look at a guy's history. Bob Murray has had two coaches, one of them twice. When he got hired, Randy Carlyle was the coach, and the only reason he fired Randy Carlyle in the middle of a season was because Bruce Boudreau was available. Bruce Boudreau got fired in Washington. He brought him right there, and he did it. Bruce Boudreau, there were several times, and Boudreau and Murray didn't have a great relationship at the end, but there were several times people were thinking, you're going to fire Boudreau during the season, and he would come right out and say, I don't believe in that. I don't want to do it. I think Bruce deserves a chance when we're healthy. And he did that. He went right to the end of the year. So I really believe with Carlisle, unless it gets so bad that he has got no other choice, he wants to let him have the year. And Fowler and Raquel are just getting back.
Both huge,
Yeah.
and Raquel specifically a team that needs goals. Talking about trades a couple of seconds ago, February 25th, trade deadline on the horizon. We already mentioned Dougie Hamilton, mentioned Michael Furland as well. We've talked about Jake Muzzin before with the Los Angeles Kings. Just saw him on Hockey Night against the Oilers on Saturday. What's happening, if anything, with him?
I think the price has been set very high. Very high. He's got another year under contract. It's very good contract. And also, he's played great. You know, Doughty gets the name recognition, deservedly so.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a superstar. But Muzzin's been their best defenseman this year. Quietly, he's been outstanding in a tough situation. But guys tell me they think someone's going to pay it.
Really, hey?
Yeah, they think
For that
someone's going to pay it. And it's going to be, at the very least, a first-rounder and more. And like just one guy told me, and he said you can't use the name because then they'll know who it was. But you know, they got told they were kind of in and around it, and they got told what the price was, and you know they're like we're not willing to do that.
How frisky are they going to be? Los Angeles come trade deadline
I
time.
think they're going to look at what can we get, like you know what can we get, what can we add, and you know I think one of the teams that was sniffing around was Philly. But if you're Philly now, why are you giving up futures? You might as well just wait to the summer.
Don't. If you're Philadelphia, and you saw what happened last night against Washington.
They're not playing hard enough. Like if your team is just outside the race, but you're playing really hard and you want to reward your guys, that's one thing. But you know, they get shut out by St. Louis. They're not going. I mean, you're not helping. Why are you giving up assets? You say we'll deal with all this in the summer.
Let's do Philly now. Then let's get there. And front and center when it comes to trade talk, I would imagine that Wayne Simmons' name would be out there.
Yep.
And it's interesting. We're doing Nashville, Chicago tonight. And as we play fantasy general manager and where can you see Wayne Simmons ending up, man, I can see him in a Nashville uniform, knowing they want someone in front of the net so bad. I can see Wayne Simmons in Nashville so fast.
Here, let me take another question. Where can't you see Wayne Simmons?
No, everywhere. But I'm talking about that one team that we know is looking for someone. Listen, Scott Hartnell is not there anymore, but looking for someone to fill a role like that around the net, in front of the net, tipping pucks, banging pucks in, like to fill that spot. I don't know. Maybe it's just too easy, but I'm drawing a line between Philadelphia
I think it's
and
a great
Nashville
one
with Wayne Simmons.
I think it's a great line. It's a great idea. You know, if I was Toronto, I'd be on Wayne Simmons. You know who else I would be going after Wayne Simmons if I was them is Calgary.
Why Calgary?
Well, just because, you know, I think we've talked about, you've got a loaded division, right? And if you don't win it, and it's going to be a race, but even if you do win it, how's he going to hurt you? You know,
I just don't know what spot he takes.
If you have to, you look at maybe moving someone out, depending on what you want to do. I think you can always find room for guys like that. If I was Calgary, I'd be looking at it. You know, but again, like how many of those teams do you look at and say they couldn't use a Wayne Simmons?
Yeah.
You know, Mark Bergevin just said he's not doing a rental. So, I mean, that was another spot. Boy, how good would he look in a Montreal uniform?
Sure.
But he's not doing it for a rental right now.
How deep do the cuts go, do you think, in Philadelphia? I mean, eyes on Chuck Fletcher come trade deadline.
Well, the way it's gone this year, who's safe?
Carter Hart.
Yeah, okay. That's
Ivan Provorov.
That's a really
probably.
bold. That's a you know, Ivan Provorov's had a really rough year, but I'm the same with you. Like it's
no way.
You know, like you can't be impatient with young guys like that.
Yeah. Sean Couturier would be safe.
Okay.
I think Voracek would be vulnerable / quite vulnerable.
I think if Hextall was still there for sure. I don't know yet about Fletcher.
Those would be the guys that I would have on my safe list. Maybe Travis Konechny, knowing that there's still a potential there.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, you're looking at the way that team has gone this year, and you're probably not feeling very good about the group you have. I really thought that, and sometimes there's that jolt, right? So Carter Hart comes up, and they play that great game where they talk about, hey, we got to protect this guy. And that should be a galvanizing moment for you. You should say, all right, these guys rallied around this kid, and he got the win, and then he wins again, but sometimes that just doesn't last.
In the financial market, that's referred to as a dead cat bounce. Hit the bottom, and boom, you get that quick little uptick, and then you're right back down.
But you're probably feeling, if you're the Flyers, you're probably feeling very good about your team in those games, even though you may not think that Hart is ready.
Yeah.
You're thinking to yourself, hey, these guys knew this was an exceptional situation, and they rallied around it. So you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, we're going to be good. And now you're seeing where this is going. And and if I was Philly, I'd be careful, because these are the kinds of times you make trades where you're like, I'm so disgusted with these guys.
Yeah, you hate your team.
You really have to be smart about it.
And that's probably why Chuck Fletcher's taking his time. Listen, the hue and cry when Ron Hextall was dismissed as general manager was Paul Holmgren wanted some action.
Yes.
And he wanted things to happen.
And then the vultures start circling around.
Right. And then he came in, Chuck Fletcher did, and, well, the goaltender was called up. But outside of that, nothing happened.
Well, and remember when Craig McTavish got hired as the Oilers GM and he talked about bold moves?
Yeah.
When you do that, like, these guys, they come right after you. They're vultures.
Well, here's
like
my
we
question
said.
then. Did Chuck Fletcher come in and essentially throw a wet blanket on, hold on a second here, let's not just start firing bodies out the door, let's not be impulsive?
There's probably some of that. But also, I bet you he saw what the offers were out there and said to these guys, look, we can't do this.
Yeah.
We can't do this. You know, it's a line I've used a lot. When you're drowning,
Yeah.
they don't throw you life preservers. They throw you anvils. He's probably ducking a lot of anvils right now.
Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah.
You write about Michael Del Zotto. I have questions, and you write about Quinn Hughes and questions about Alex Edler as well. Let's start with MDZ.
You know, he's not playing. He played 12 minutes, I guess, in Montreal on Thursday night. You know, I saw him come off the ice, and I chatted with him briefly. You know, he wants to be smart about it. He's not going to say anything bad. You know, he knows what the situation is. I'm sure he was really disappointed that he didn't get to play in Toronto because he's from there.
Yep.
But he kept all that stuff quiet. He wants to play. You know that. Every player wants to play. The one thing I heard when I looked into it is I think there is interest, but I think part of the problem is, and I do think there will be some good teams out there that will take him as insurance, but the problem is that you don't have a lot of cap room, and he's making about $3 million. Yeah. And I do think Vancouver was potentially willing to take money, but I think they just want to wait closer to the deadline for the cap space.
To me, Vancouver's got two guys that step in and help you on the power play, neither of which are being used. One is Sam Gagner, and the other is Michael Del Zotto.
Yeah.
Action on both of those players at trade deadline. You know, just knowing how crucial power play is right now.
The Gagner is a little difficult because he's got one more year, but again, I heard Vancouver was willing to take money. I'm going to steal a Doug McLean line here. I'm going to tell you what I heard. I'm not going to tell you if it's true.
I'm not telling you if it's true. I'm just telling you what I heard.
That's exactly. I love that line by Doug. That's good. That gets you out of a lot of trouble. So I had reported this year that Chicago was interested in Sam Gagner, and Jim Benning was asked about that by some reporters in BC, and he just said, look, I don't think it's right to talk about those kinds of things. So fair enough. I think I totally get that. So what I heard with Chicago and Gagner was, I think Chicago or Vancouver didn't want to take back a player for contract reasons and stuff like that. And so they couldn't work it out. That's what I heard was one of the issues. The Canucks were willing to take money, but they weren't so interested in taking a body back. And I think Chicago was kind of like, we don't want to add a body without giving up a contract. So I think that was one of the reasons it didn't work out.
Just so our listeners all understand, each team can only carry a maximum of 50 contracts.
Yes. So that was one of the issues. But whatever the case is, it didn't happen. Now, I did see that when Green held his scrum in Toronto on Saturday morning, he was asked about Gagner because Gagner is right there.
Yeah.
And he just said no. And he didn't. He was asked about it. He just wasn't going down that road. So whatever reason, it wasn't happening.
But Alexander Edler having a really nice season. He's due July 1st.
Well, Nick mentioned on Saturday night that Edler, they're going to offer him a contract. And look, Edler's got a no-trade clause. He controls the situation. He has shown zero inclination to leave. I believe that last year Tampa Bay was interested in Edler and wanted him, and he just said no. And I spoke to him last week before they played in Toronto, and he reiterated, I want to play for the Canucks. I want to stay here. So, and the other thing now is Pettersson has totally changed the outlook of your franchise. All of a sudden, you're in the race. And you can talk about, they've played more games than anyone else. It's not real, whatever. Sometimes you look at it from the Bill Parcells playbook. You are what your record says you are. And your record says right now for the Canucks, you're at least in the race. I think if you're the Canucks and you're running the team, you're looking at it like, if we can get Pettersson some help, could we be in the race next year?
Do you think they add?
I don't think they add.
Deadline?
I don't think they add. No. I'm saying that I can see why extending Edler makes sense.
I would extend Edler all day.
Because he's playing great.
The reason that I would throw out there is,
what are you going to do next year without Edler?
Precise. Here's my thinking on it. You extend Edler because on the horizon you have Quinn Hughes.
Yeah.
And on the horizon,
I think they tried to get out of the.
I'll get you to Quinn Hughes here in a second, but you have Quinn Hughes on the horizon, and your fingers crossed if you're Vancouver and the rehab goes good and it has a good off season. You have Olli Juolevi coming sooner or later. You need veteran defensemen for these guys. And I always go back to the lesson of the Detroit Red Wings and Nick Lidstrom. Lidstrom shows up in Detroit, and they pair him with Brad McCrimmon, who for young guys is fantastic.
Chris Pronger,
right? Like you go right down the list of all these, quote unquote generational defensemen. And one of the common denominators is they had a vet with them early. If you're the Vancouver Canucks, you look at your blue line. They're a better guy than Alex Edler.
Yeah,
for these guys to grow with. To me, the answer is an obvious one. You re-sign Edler. You do the deal like that.
Yeah.
Heartbeat. It's an investment in your defenseman for the future.
And you say to him, look, you're making $5 now.
$5 million.
We'd like to be around here on a 3-year deal.
Yeah.
See.
Quinn Hughes.
So it was funny. Somebody texted me after the segment on Saturday night, and they said, like, how transparent was that for the Canucks to leak that to you? And I laughed, and I said, first of all, if the Canucks were going to leak something to anyone, it wasn't going to be me. We've had our battles over the last couple of years. So what happened was at the World Juniors, as you know, all the teams are there. And a few guys were texting me and saying, the Canucks want Hughes to come out. The Canucks want Hughes to come out. And so I looked into it, and I was told he's not coming out. But I checked a couple of guys in the NCAA. I said, are you guys hearing this at all? And they go, oh, yeah. Like there was one guy in their conference who was like, I know they're not very good, but we'd feel a lot better about Michigan this year if he wasn't playing for them. So, but we're hearing it. And they asked me, are you hearing it? I said, finally, I'm just going to call somebody. And they sighed and they were like, okay,
fine.
But at the end of the day, they made a deal. And the other thing too is, and as someone else has called me since I talked about it, and they said, look, and this is what the Canucks I think were sensitive to. If Quinn Hughes leaves now, are they going to rip the Canucks or are they going to rip the player? They're going to rip the player for bailing on the team.
Same thing that Colaposo got.
Exactly. Or Charlie Coyle, who left NCAA and went up to the Q.
Yeah.
Why would you do that to the guy? Mm-hmm. And they just said, you know what, we're not going to put him in that position. I think they really wanted to do it, and I totally understand why they want to do it because the kid's dynamite. He's going to be a hell of a player. But I think at the end of the day, they're just like, let's not even think about putting him in that position. We made a deal.
You mentioned that Pettersson and his performance has changed expectations for the Vancouver Canucks.
Yeah.
That what was once thought of as a long-term rebuild might not be so long. How close do you think Vancouver is?
I don't think they're close yet. They need another they need some more, like Quinn Hughes. I'd be curious. Like defenseman's always harder, right?
Of course.
So I'm curious to see how effective he's going to be. I assume he'll be in the lineup next year. So I'm curious to see how effective he'll be, but at least you've got a talent there that you can say. The one thing I think about Vancouver that's worked better is a lot of these role players they've signed to contracts. Like we had Beagle.
Yep.
We had Roussel. Roussel. Even Brandon Sutter, like, was taking a lot of abuse there. Now that you have Pettersson in your top and you have Horvat as your number 2 center, all of a sudden guys are playing where they're supposed to be. And I think that team, you don't have to ask Pettersson or Horvat to do ridiculous amounts now because you've got your Sutter, you've got your Beagle, they can play, and you're at least solidified in spots where you didn't think you were necessarily going to be solidified. Edler and Tanev, the way they're playing this year, all of a sudden you just feel much better about your D. Now, a big key is going to be if Markstrom can stay at that level. He's got his doubters out there. But the fact is that, Jeff, you're looking at their roster and you're saying it's better than we thought.
Yep.
And you know what? I think they got to add. They got to add.
Markstrom is the big question mark. I'm with you 100%. We talked about this last Wednesday on our show that on television, how this is someone that needs rest. Mm-hmm. This is not someone who's going to reel off 8 games in a row, which is why it's crucial that Thatcher Demko spells off and starts to show signs of being able to take over that number 1 spot. But to me, Vancouver has a real luxury position here for a key position, and that's net minding. Because not only do they have Markstrom, not only do they have Thatcher Demko, but they might just have, for my money, Mike DiPietro is the best goaltender in the CHL, and he's on the horizon too. So that's 3 in the most crucial position. With all due respect to all you centers and defensemen, the most crucial position in the NHL. And they got 3 that look real good. Like, to me, if I'm Vancouver Canucks fan, I'm feeling really good about my team for the future.
You are sitting here and you're saying, I like this. And at the very least, what you have is assets. You look at Calgary.
Yeah.
They had Riddick. They had Gillies. They had the kid from London, Parsons.
Yeah, Tyler Parsons.
And they had a couple other guys they really liked. And you don't think 4 or 5 are going to turn out, but you're hoping 2 or 3 will. And Riddick looks like he's a guy, and they still haven't given up on Gillies or Parsons yet. They're lottery tickets. That's what you want. You want to have lottery tickets.
Let me ask you a hypothetical.
By the way, can we talk about DiPietro for a second?
Shoot.
Who we had on the podcast last year. Really nice kid. I felt badly that he felt that he needed to send out that tweet last week.
That's Mike, though. That's Michael. I've got to know him since the Windsor tournament.
No, he's a really nice kid. But, like, sometimes, I don't want to, I don't like to rip on the World Juniors because then it almost looks partisan, right? Because that's a TSN event and it's not a Sportsnet event. But I watched it this year. Like, the people who made fun of Max Comtois, those are just losers. There's no other way to put it. Those people are losers. But I watch Karlsson, and I don't like this whole thing about take pictures on the team that's just lost the semifinal. We want people who compete for our teams, whether they're in the NHL or internationally, to show that they really care. So you ask Karlsson to take a photo like that after he's lost the game, or Elias Anderson with the silver medal.
Silver medal last year, yeah.
Or DiPietro feeling he needs to apologize to everybody on Twitter. Something is not right here. It's too much.
That it's no longer just treated as a development tournament. Hang on. I think is the point that you're making is that too much is made of this 2-week snapshot of a young hockey player's career?
Yeah, or just, these, like, remember what cement heads we were when we were 19 years old?
Yep.
Yeah, like I was
19, 22, 26, 31.
36, 46. No, but like, and you know what? I don't even think it's the broadcaster's fault. I just think that this has gotten, we're expecting too much of kids. You just lost. Anderson lost. I remember Marianne Limpert, great Canadian swimmer. She told me at the Olympics once that the hardest positions to finish in were second and fourth. Because
Silver or off the podium.
Because you lost to gold or you lost a medal. Yeah. I've always remembered that. She always said that to me. The hardest position to finish is second and fourth. So you've got Elias Anderson, who's got a silver, which means you lost the gold medal game. Yeah. And silver's a great medal, but you lost the gold medal game. And you've got Karlsson, who at that point didn't know he was going to win a bronze. He just knew he couldn't win a gold or a silver. And they show their competitive fire. They're disappointed. They're kids. They show their competitive fire. I don't know. I just wonder if there's a better way to handle this in the aftermath.
I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know either.
As for silver medals, that has always been, to me, the medal that is almost impossible to appreciate at that moment, but years later, once you mature and you understand, you give your career some context, you do appreciate it. I think that athletes years later appreciate that they won a silver medal. But at that time, you're right. That's generally not a medal that you win. It is something that you've lost. And silver feels like a consolation prize.
You
win silver by getting there.
There was an American volleyball player. Her name was Flo Hyman. And she was an Olympian. And I remember she did an interview with a broadcaster. The U.S., I think they lost to Russia in one of the Olympics. I can't remember if it was Seoul or it was Los Angeles or Barcelona or whichever one it was. And the interviewer asked her about silver, and she said something like, "I'm damn proud of my silver medal."
Good.
And tough on, and I think she's like, "I don't care about who doesn't like it." Now I think she was something like 26 at the time. And that's the way I get it with you. Like in the moment, when you're older, it's still hard because you've lost in the moment, but you recognize that, finishing second in the world in something, it's not that bad. But I think sometimes it's harder when you're younger. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I think one of the things I think Hockey Canada has done really well is I think you used to cover, like I did, the kids getting cut in the morning.
Oh, that was the worst, Elliotte.
And you know what?
Good, 6 o'clock in the morning, get out of the hotel.
Good on them. They recognized that was bad.
Brutal.
And they found a better way. They did, nothing is ever going to be easier. Because of the way it is going to be easy, because of the way it's covered, it's always going to be hard. But they realized that didn't work, and they found a better way. I'm like you. I don't have all the answers here, but watching, Anderson and Karlsson and DiPietro, like I said, the Comtois people, those are just losers. Like, they're just total losers. Yeah. But just watching all of these reactions, I got to think there's a solution here or something like that. There's got to be a better way.
It can turn into a bigger conversation, but the point has been made before that this is what happens when you put too much of a premium on winning. When everything is about winning, this idea that you're either first or you're last.
Well, I got to tell you, that's a hard one for me because I can only judge other people the way I judge myself. And if I was in their shoes, when you're in the tournament, you're in it to win it.
Mm-hmm.
I get that.
But I've always had a hard time with the idea that losing should crush you as a human being. And I think we see that more and more now.
I'm with you, but when I'm in it, like anything I do, it comes down to the way we do our jobs here. I believe you're supposed to do it a certain way, and when you vary from that or you do poorly, you should feel some pain about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it shouldn't crush you as a human, though.
No, it shouldn't crush you
at the same time.
But but I understand emotional reactions in the moment.
Yep.
Like I get that. Like even at 48, if I do something I don't like, I have emotional reactions in the moment. I don't know. I think maybe the adults have to look at the kids a bit different, or I don't know. I'm going off here, and I don't really have a great answer for you. But I don't think it's that. Like I don't think it's that, Jeff, because I believe it's like there's one thing I really believe. There's a line from Chris Rock, and the Chris Rock says he hates it when anybody is told you're supposed to be a good father. Congratulations for being a good father.
Yeah, you're supposed to be a good father.
Because you're supposed to, you shouldn't get any congratulations for being a good dad. You're supposed to be a good dad. When you are paid to do a job or you're asked to do a job, you should expect to do that job really well. And when you play for Canada or Russia or the U.S. or Sweden or Finland or any of these teams at the World Juniors that have a chance to win, there's nothing wrong with being expected to win. You should have high standards and be expected to win. Maybe what I think is how it's handled when you don't win has to be looked at differently, because the process of getting there and finishing second in the world or third in the world, there should still be some reward to that. It's not a joke to finish second or third in the world or something.
Is there an issue with taking, and we'll just take the U20s as an example because we're discussing it here now. Is there an issue with taking 19-year-old kids, wrapping them in a flag, and putting them on a national stage in front of their country like that?
Again, I don't know if I think that's wrong.
I don't know. I don't know if it's right.
You should have.
I don't know the answer to any of this.
You should exactly. I know, and that's why I'm sitting here. I'm saying that I don't like this, but I'm not.
But listen,
you're coming up with suggestions. I'm throwing them all away.
I watch how hockey fans react to this, and how hockey fans can't control what happens. They can just cheer and they can boo. And when it's 19-year-old kids wrapped in a flag on a national stage, that's a tough spot. Now, those kids all choose to do that, and I get that. And they've brought up in a pressure cooker that is the Hockey Canada Program of Excellence. We'll just use Canada as an example.
Yeah,
I understand all that. Mm-hmm. I just want, you use, Mikey DiPietro writing that thing on Twitter. I just wonder what's happening in a 19-year-old's mind.
No, I get all that.
Through all of that.
That's why I throw the responsibility more on the adults as how to react to that as opposed to the kids. Like I said earlier, we were cement heads. I couldn't imagine being 19 years old and handling that because I was such a dope. Seriously, I couldn't imagine that. I think it's up to everyone else to react a certain way. That's why I looked at that when DiPietro sent that tweet out. The immediate thing I thought of was, what are we doing that a kid feels the need to do that?
It's a great question.
That was, I don't blame him. I blame us for creating a situation where a kid feels the need to do that. Like the people who ripped Comtois, those are total losers.
Yeah.
But the thing is too, here's the other thing, watching Karlsson, he shouldn't say F you to the crowd, and he apologized the next day. But why does he have to take a picture right after that? Now, the other two kids, they held their spot, and he should have done the same thing. But I understand why it happened. That's all.
Okay, Elliotte, before we get to hashtag Ask31, on Monday, we'll be dropping a new podcast with Ryan Johansson of the Nashville Predators. Here's a juicy teaser for all of you. This is Ryan Johansson. We recorded this one last Sunday. Okay, I assure you there is much, much more to the podcast than just one-word answers from Ryan Johansson. You want to give a little tease about this one? What was your big takeaway from Ryan Johansson last week? We'll drop this one again on Monday.
You know what? Talk softly carries a big stick.
Yeah.
I liked hearing him talk about getting the head-to-head matchup with Jonathan Toews a couple of years ago in the playoffs and what that meant to him.
And there's more stuff about dogs.
Yes.
Which is always good. Okay, hashtag Ask31. Elliotte, Jared Pettis. If you or Frege were in Doug Armstrong's shoes this season, would you guys be sellers at the deadline or stick with what you have until the draft and then blow the Blues up?
I would sell as much as I could without obviously including the young players in that. If I was them, I would definitely be trying to recoup every asset I could. This can be a fast turnaround league, and they've got talented young players.
Does that include Vladimir Tarasenko? You've talked before about the no trade kicking in July 1st.
They're sure going to look at it.
If you're going to do it, the window is now.
I just remembered this. I should have put this in my notes, but I completely forgot. Dougie Hamilton has said that he thought he was getting traded somewhere else at the draft. I believe that's St. Louis.
Interesting. From Austin, if you could change any rule in the NHL to however you like it, what would it be and why? Mine would be a lacrosse box outside the bench. In lacrosse, as you're exiting the playing surface, there's a box in front of it, and when you're in that box, you're deemed to be off the field of play. And the reason I say that, Elliotte, is hockey has one of the most unique things in sports, and that is changes as the play is going on. As the play is happening, you can change. Don't do that in football. Don't do that in basketball. Don't do that in baseball, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It is so unique. I remember talking to Eli Gold, who was the
voice of the
NASCAR.
Alabama Crimson Tide.
And also was the voice of the Birmingham Bulls.
Right.
Of the WHA. And I remember said, Eli, what to you when you're, because this was, Virgin Market, here comes, the Toronto Toros go to Birmingham, they're the Bulls. I said, what did fans love about hockey in Birmingham? I'm expecting, this is WHA, I'm expecting, rock and roll attitude, big goals,
the fights,
back scratching slap shots, the brawls, the fights. And he said something fascinating. And it's amazing what happens when you're in the forest, you don't see the trees. And it really forced me to pull back and have a look at, oh, wow, this really is a unique thing that I've always taken for granted. He said whenever the team would make wholesale changes while the play was going on, the fans didn't know what was going on, and they would start screaming and applauding and cheering. 5 guys would go off. 5 guys would come on. We don't see this in sports. And because I've just grown up with it, Elliotte, I've just assumed that, this is just something that happens in hockey, and it ain't no thing. Pull yourself back a second. You say to yourself, this is a really unique thing that hockey has. And this is why I hate that automatic throw the puck at the boards on a line change, and if it hits someone's skate, too many men on the ice. I want to keep that changing on the fly while the play is going on in this game because it is such a unique selling point to hockey that other sports don't have.
Okay. I was thinking while you were talking, and my answer is something that the Chicago Blackhawks brought up last year at the GM meetings. And I understand it came from John McDonough, who is a baseball guy first from his days at the Cubs.
Green ice?
And no, not green ice. It's that he wonders if you're going to pay at least several $100,000, possibly even $1 million or $2 million, for a player who's not going to play in the game. Why can't you bring him out of the dressing room later? Like, say your scratch is a goal scorer.
Yeah.
You're down 2-0 going into the third period. Could you bring him in for the third period? You got to take somebody out of the game.
Someone out, but
you can put that person in. I understand it got no traction, but I love it.
You have the shootout specialist.
Yes.
Who's sitting in the dressing room just warming up his hands over the heater. And, we're going to a shootout. Player X is out. Here comes the shootout
Why
specialist.
not? Or also, too, you're in a huge game. Somebody gets injured. At least you can have a body. It may not be a comparable body, but you can put someone in.
I love all ideas like this.
I know. I root for chaos.
Concert
I love
for
that.
all.
I'm with you.
For sure.
You've brought me over to your chaos.
You've come to the dark side. Welcome, Elliotte. We have room for more. Please join us. Peter Pietrangelo. Great name. At this point last year, there were about 20 players averaging a point a game. This year, there are more than 40. That is a ridiculous increase at the top end of the league. What could be behind that other than teams stacking their top line?
I think it's what Roland Melanson said in a conversation I had with him a couple of years ago, that it's impossible to play well, not impossible. It's harder to play defense now.
Yeah.
The goalie equipment is smaller. The players are more skilled than ever. They have shooting coaches, as you've talked about. They practice their skills more in the summer than maybe they spend in the weight room. They skate differently on their edges. It's hard to play defense. You can't hook. You can't slash. You can't hold. There's no Darian Hatchers anymore killing you if you come anywhere near the front of the net.
Yeah.
The game has changed a ton. It's like the NFL. They've made it very hard to play defense. In the NHL, they've made it very hard to play defense. And, Jeff, the other thing, too, is when you talk about young defensemen now, what do you talk about? Can you defend? No. Who cares? Can you move the puck up the ice?
But that is still defending, keeping the puck out of your zone.
Yeah, but it's not. Nobody cares.
I don't want you to philosophical. I know.
It's always better to keep the puck up this. Yeah, we know that, but at least 50% of the game, you're gonna have the puck in your end. What are you gonna do about it?
From Ryan Allen, I want this.
Do you disagree with me?
No, okay, I do agree with you. No, I completely agree with you.
Just wanted to make sure. Fire him.
Listen, who's raising their son or daughter to be a quote unquote Rod Langway, Adam Foote, defensive defense. But no, you want your son or daughter to move the puck, move their feet. You're going to skate. That's the way everyone does, which goes to my further point. Eventually, maybe not in our lifetime, although maybe.
Positionless hockey?
Positionless
It
hockey.
could happen.
The dissolution of positions altogether.
Could happen. By the way, someone said to me, you always bring up Darian Hatcher. Like, did you hate Darian Hatcher or something? I said, no, I love Darian Hatcher as a player. He was just the guy who I always think of who would club you when you got close to his net.
You know, it's funny because you have your scenario for bringing up Darian Hatcher. You know what mine is?
What's that?
Mine is, and he's always my go-to for this example as well. My go-to for Darian Hatcher is always guys that win the real game of hockey. We saw it coming out of the lockout in 2004-05. Guys that get bought out and then get another contract right away.
That's right, yes.
Vinny LeCavalier was great at
Yes.
that as well. But my go-to is always, man, Darian Hatcher won it big. He got the buyout, then he got another contract right away.
In Philly, yeah.
Wins the real game of hockey, bought out by Detroit coming out of the 05 lockout. Okay, Ryan Allen.
Okay.
I want to get this one in for two reasons. One, because I love the reference, and two, I'm curious about the answer. The best interviewer in wrestling of all time was Mean Gene. Who is Mean Gene of the NHL, past or present?
First of all, I would say that there's a guy in wrestling who didn't get enough credit because he wasn't national. And that guy's name was Lance Russell.
Yes.
And Lance Russell
Memphis
worked
wrestling,
in Memphis.
yes.
And if you ever watch some of that old stuff, and I periodically have looked into it, how angry he gets when the good guy gets attacked or beaten up or something like that, it is hilarious.
The regional guys were great. Lance was great. Gordon Soley.
I was never as big a
loved
Gordon
Soley.
Soley guy as
The Crimson
everybody
Mask.
else,
Come on,
yes.
all the vernacular
No,
he introduced.
like Okerlund, and I'm not Okerlund. He was spectacular, but I would say Lance Russell was up there with Gene. He was right up there. And when I was a kid, and you got the Mid-Atlantic in Toronto, I loved Bob Caudle and David Crockett. That's who it was. I love those guys. But Russell and Oakland are the best. Hockey, it's different because how many long-form interviews where a player really lets loose can you get? Mm-hmm. I would probably have to say Oak. Because
Scott's my go-to.
Because he does it so well. Like after hours, he does it so great. And on the ice after the Stanley Cup, he does it so great. Oak would have to be my guy. And I think the reason is he gets the opportunity and he takes advantage of the opportunity. When you are doing after hours or you see Scott Oak after you've won the Stanley Cup, you have to be, what you're getting into. You know what this is going to be.
And you have to
and the
bring
players accept that. And I think that's a credit to what Scott has done. You know what you're getting into, and you're accepting getting into that.
If we can bring it back to Mean Gene, folks go on. If you're going to go down the YouTube rabbit hole with Mean Gene Okerlund, to me, my favorite, maybe the best one, was the one he did with Mad Dog Vachon. In the Mad Dog, this is AWA, Mad Dog Vachon, Crusher Jerry Blackwell feud where he's building the coffin for Blackwell. It is some of the best work by Mean Gene, who is over the top fantastic, always.
Hands up if you are listening to this podcast right now and thinking, what is with these two losers?
Okay, back to questions about hockey. Nicholas Ornbol submits this. Who is the most underrated player in the league?
Whoa.
My go-to is always Matthias Ekholm, but he's been talked about enough now that
Well, he came through Toronto this week, so everybody knows.
No
him
longer
again, right?
underrated. I would go to someone like Radek Faksa in Dallas.
He'd be up there. I was always a Vlasic guy. I thought he always got shafted.
True.
He's having a rough year this year, and he's been out. But Vlasic has generally been my go-to. It's hard for a guy in Canada to be underrated. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really difficult thing because you get so much attention in this country.
Which is why Barkov was an answer for a long time as well.
Barkov is a great one. I think he came through Toronto a couple weeks ago, and everybody was talking about Barkov, so he would be up there. Okay, he's not the most underrated player in the league, but I'll vary off this slightly. You know who a guy who I think might get some interesting action around the trade deadline is Nick Jensen of Detroit.
Really, hey?
Just because he's not the most hugely known guy. He's played not bad this year. They played a game in Toronto where he stood up Tavares at the blue line, and we singled it out, and someone texted me and said, there's a bit more of that with him this year. I've heard his name here and there as a potential guy who could be involved if Detroit doesn't keep him. And people have said he's not a big name, but quietly he's had a good season. But, Barkov and Vlasic have tended to be my answers over the years.
David Griffith asks this.
Is this David Griffith who used to work for the Maple Leafs and
Stone
now
Cold?
works for Arizona?
No, this isn't Stone Cold.
Okay.
Different guy. Has Elliotte ever been, quote unquote, fed or felt he's been fed a false rumor by a GM at trade deadline in order to jumpstart a guy's game? I have suspicions that Lombardi made up Brown trade rumors in 212 to get him going, by the way, which worked. Getting fed.
I don't know about that specific instance, but I do think that I have been. One thing I do believe has happened, and it happened recently, was I believe there was a GM out there who tried to figure out how some things were getting out, and he gave different rumors to different people, seeing what would get back to me that I would call him and ask him about.
Really? Hey?
Yes.
How do you feel when that happens?
I don't like it. I've talked to you about this before. I don't like it when people get in trouble for things that I do.
Yeah.
And I would be much rather that someone was mad at me than mad at anyone else.
From Luke, could we see a, quote, exceptional status exception for CHL players who are drafted by an NHL team that can avoid their 20-year-old season and go to the AHL instead? Example, Cody Glass could go to the AHL over the Western Hockey League for this season. Also, which books are you reading now?
I forgot to bring in my book and leave it right here next to Jeff so I could look smart. I'll get to the first part of your question first. The reason that generally I've said no is that the Canadian Hockey League wants those players in the CHL. They sell tickets and they've always fought for it, and they get that deal. Now, I am curious to see if in the new CBA the draft has changed. And if the draft has changed, and we've talked about the reports on the draft in the past, that only 19-year-olds would only be eligible in the first round, and would the CHL and the USHL and the NCAA make an agreement where after you're drafted, you could potentially go to the NCAA or the AHL sooner? And now, right now, after you're in the CHL, you can't go to the NCAA, but I think they've at least all talked about what are the possibilities of this. So the answer to your question right now is no, I don't see it because the CHL fights for these guys, but I am wondering if there's a change in the new CBA. I know they've continued to talk about the possibility of changing the draft. As for the book, I am reading right now. The book is about, and I can't remember the title, but it's about a reporter by the name of Marie Colvin. She was a war reporter around the world who died in Syria last year. And she was fearless. And I've read about, I'm halfway through the book. I'm reading about her life and her history, and I haven't really gotten into the war reporting yet. But I am somebody who once was asked if he would ever want to do something like that. And if I was younger and single, I probably would have done it.
Yep.
But from what I've heard about her, and what I'm learning about her is she was a tough, fearless person who risked her life to try to get the truth out there. And I think the book is exceptional. I'm really enjoying reading it.
That sounds fascinating. What is it called? Amal has a picture
Oh,
of
In
it
Extremis, The Life
There you
and
go.
Death of the War Correspondent Marie Colvin. That's the book. Thank you, Amal.
For me, it's Before You Know It. Do you know Dr. John Barg?
No.
He's a psych prof at Yale, and he's talked about this for years. You can go down wormholes on YouTube and hear his lectures. He does a lot on the unconscious mind and the reasons we make decisions based on how our mind works unconsciously, which I'm fascinated by.
That is
This
fascinating.
dovetails me finally reading Food of the Gods by Terrence McKenna, which I finally finished off. I'm a huge fan of McKenna, to no one's surprise, who's listened to this podcast. Yeah, but Before You Know It is a fascinating read as well. Let's get to one more, and we'll finish up the podcast. And the last question is going to go to Tonelli. Why doesn't
Is he wearing
anyone...
number 27?
That's right. Big 84 Canada Cup. He was great in that.
Yes.
Why doesn't anyone do a story about the referees in the NHL regarding how the recruiting seems to be geared towards ex-players as opposed to qualified candidates? Recruiting officials, I think, is what Tonelli is trying to get at.
I don't know. Excuse me. It sounds like this tweeter, him or her, has some information here that they feel is...
I mean, they recruit. One of the first places you recruit from is minor hockey, college hockey. Hey, if you want to continue a career in hockey, and it's not going to happen as a player, would you consider officiating?
I kind of got the impression from that tweet that they felt that...
was it Corey Severette we just saw?
Yes.
Right?
I kind of got the impression that they were saying that they knew of somebody who got kind of passed over or not counted because...
No, I think the question is more along the lines of why do they only recruit ex-players?
I don't think they do. Like, for example, there were a number of women who were at their camp this past summer.
Yes.
And I believe there's a female who's going to officiate at the Beanpot this year. I think she's the first one ever. So, I mean, they could be female ex-players. I'm not sure. But, I mean, obviously you're looking for somebody who's got a feel of the game, but I don't think they would ever ignore anyone. I know...
I think, hang on, you can pause on that. I think you need people that can keep up with the play.
That's the most important thing.
I think that's a huge one, and who can keep up better than people that play.
Yes. But I'm sure if there's a good official out there who'd never had a playing background but was a good referee or linesman, they wouldn't say no. I know for a long time they were having trouble finding guys because at the younger levels, the abuse of officials was so bad that they were losing that pipeline.
100%.
So maybe that's why it changed. But I don't think anybody would be disqualified because they're not a former player. So the other day, there was a story, and it was all over Twitter and the internet. Donna Spencer wrote it for the Canadian Press, and it's Cassandra Gregory. She's 23 years old. She's from Edmonton. And she was nominated to work on the Alberta Junior Hockey League, and she just wasn't getting any assignments, and she felt it was gender-related. First of all, I would tell her not to give up. Mm-hmm. And secondly, I wouldn't be surprised if, A, that changes because of all the attention this got, and B, I think it's just a matter of time, Jeff, until we start seeing more. Yeah. Like, I don't... Like, the world is changing. We all know that. And look, if you're inviting female referees to the NHL camp and you're having them do the Beanpot, participate in that, it's just a matter of time.
It just has to happen to that point. It has to happen at the lower levels first before it happens at the NHL. No one's walking into the NHL as an official, whether you're male or female. Like, this is all at the junior hockey level, at the Tier 2 level. You mentioned the AJHL, at the NCAA level. That's where... that's the route that leads to the fruit, which is the NHL. And that's where that vibrancy, I think, needs to happen for female officials first.
But it's coming.
Obviously. It's coming.
You can't stop progress.
Speaking of officials, I had to laugh on the weekend. I saw what is, and you understand what they're trying to say in the sign, one of the more curious signs I've ever seen at a rink. So... My 2010 was playing in Pickering on the weekend at Don Beer Arena, playing against Ajax Pickering Raiders. And there's a sign at the rink. And you know what they're trying to say is like, hey, give the referees some slack here, cut them a little bit of slack, just phrase a little bit awkwardly. There's a sign right on the wall across from center ice and it says, that referee could be your son or daughter. You know what they're trying to say, but how do you know my background? That referee could be your son or daughter. Mm-hmm. Had to laugh.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and that's the pod for the week. Going out with the Kents. This is from the start. We're keeping it local this week, so hey to Warren, Fred, Luke, and Tanner. This is the Kents with From the Starts, curling in the studio, cooking something up as we speak.